All right, Rich Edson at the State Department. Melissa.
Here now to react is Peter Brookes, the Heritage Foundation Senior Fellow and former Deputy Assistant Defense Secretary. You know, there's a lot of buzz behind the scenes that the punishment for Saudi Arabia or whatever the exchange is in order for the U.S. to back off a bit is greater than we know. It may even be that the Crown Prince won't ascend. Have you heard any of this talk, and do you buy it?
Well, I doubt that there's any real competitors to the Crown Prince at this point. Obviously, there's a political crisis between the United States and Saudi Arabia and other countries as well. European countries have been reacting as well. But this is a very difficult situation, and I think the discussions today, Melissa, on Capitol Hill were policy-based. That was about the Secretary of Defense and Secretary of State talking about the policy equities here in the relationship with Saudi Arabia, considering everything that's going on in that part of the world, whether it's countering violent extremism, whether it's Syria, whether it's Iranian expansionism, the war in Yemen. There's just so many things going on there. Now, I'm not saying I think there's certainly a possibility, Melissa, that the CIA director will at some point go to Capitol Hill to brief a broader group of members than we saw today, or we didn't see today, or the Director of National Intelligence. So I think that's certainly a possibility, but today's discussions were policy discussions, I think.
I also want to get your take on President Trump's possible sit-down with Russian President Vladimir Putin at the G20. We keep hearing it's on, it's off, it's going to happen.
Right.
You know, and I imagine the back and forth will continue right up into the very second when they walk out of the room after it's over, if it happens. First of all, do you think it's going to happen, and should it?
Well, look, you know, I think the president is doing the right thing here by keeping pressure on Putin over Ukraine. You know what happened last weekend with the shipping. The sailors are still being detained. The ships are still being detained. There's talk. The Ukrainians are saying the Russians have bigger ambitions. They may do something broader than what they did in the Kerch Straits the other day. So I think the president is holding out the possibility of a meeting, hoping to hem Putin in on what he might do in Ukraine. You know, Putin craves international attention and would be certainly against being isolated at this G20 where there'll be so much press coverage considering who is going to be there, including the Crown Prince. So I think that the president is using this to deter Putin from going any further with Ukraine, and I hope that Ukraine certainly will come up in their discussions among other important security issues.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the other important security issues, because I've even heard talk of Russia figuring into the mix when you talk about the Middle East and Israel and back channels both through Russia and Egypt trying to rein in radical Islam, and Russia being, you know, almost on the helpful side of that equation potentially. Is that a possibility?
There's a lot of issues. You know, one of the other issues, Melissa, is the INF Treaty. You remember a couple of weeks ago, National Security Advisor John Bolton was in Moscow. This is the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. The Americans want out of it because the Russians are cheating. We want also out of it because the Chinese are building a tremendous military force out there that is not constrained by this treaty. So the INF Treaty will be there. Russia is also interested in the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty renewal, which will come up in 2021. The Middle East, they're obviously in Syria. They have a relationship with Iran. They've gotten very cozy with Turkey. So there's a tremendous number of issues. North Korea, I mean, there have been complaints coming out of the UN that the Russians are doing ship-to-ship transfers and providing goods, UN-sanctioned goods, to North Korea while we're trying to get North Korea to denuclearize. So Russia is a major player, you know, globally, and certainly across a broad swath of our national security interests.
That's really important. If people were listening closely, what you just put out there is they've inserted themselves. You think about almost any problem or any conflict around the world where we're involved trying to untangle the pieces, and you just mentioned Russia has a role or has inserted themselves almost everywhere. Interesting stuff to follow. Peter Brookes, thank you as always for your expertise.
Thank you, Melissa.
All right, so President Trump's been standing his ground when it comes to trade with China.